Dungeons and Dragons has the ability to build vast and lore deep worlds. Anything is possible when it comes to this classic tabletop game. But put away those 16 sets of dice because this makes Dungeons and Dragons essentially able to call anything a religion. This makes analyzing D&D harder because are there even set rules for a religion in Dungeons and Dragons? Well, I guess it depends on what edition you're playing. I only have 5th edition books to aid my research. But this still begs the question. I can make this world full of any religion that I want. Where is the line drawn? At what point do we consider something a religion rather than just a cult? If I can build a world based off of anything, then who is to stop me from making my Melody the goddess of this new world? Spoiler, there isn't. D&D is simply too flexible. This may be harder than I thought. The thing with Dungeons and Dragons is the amount of freedom that comes with playing the game. This is why I'm going to be using Baldur's Gate 3 as my main base on what the standard is in a D&D 5th edition inspired world. This game, much like the 5th edition books of D&D, is set in the Forgotten Realms universe. It's a vast, beautiful land full of so many possibilities. Everything you do affects the world around you. A rundown quickly of the plot is that your character has been infected by a tadpole parasite, and you are on an adventure to get it the hell out! Along the way, you can round up various friends, and each and every one of them have deep, deep lore. For example, this is Shadowheart. She is a cleric and believes in the omni-god Shar, a neutral evil goddess of darkness and loss. She's hardcore in her beliefs, even attempting to convert those around you. But the thing is, there is potential in her storyline for this to change. I'll come back to Shadowheart here in a minute because there's so much religious content that specifically surrounds just her, but also the religious content in this game is everywhere you go. Everything you see, everything you talk to, you're bound to come across religious conversation at some point, which says a lot because this game is massive. Luckily, I have played through Baldur's Gate 3 already. The only issue here, though, was my first playthrough was a chaotic evil monk. She was a loth-hating drow with a sketchy vampire boyfriend who was also seemingly not very religious. They both just kind of went with the flow and did so many terrible, terrible things. The other two in my party were religious, but also my only other choices of companions in this world, because at this point I had accidentally killed all the other 7 companions that you can adventure with. So I was stuck with the option between a goth cleric girl with BPD and the most annoying wizard known to man, obsessed with his ex, who also conveniently happens to be his goddess. Mistra, known as the mother of all magic. Mistra is an interesting goddess, and she's prominent throughout the game if you have Gale in your party, in which case I had no other options. I had left him stuck in the rock at the very beginning of the game and just decided not to help him. But then I had played through the entire first act of the game and somehow lost every other choice of companions. I only had 2 characters that would help me be as evil as I was being, and everyone else was just plain dead. But this game wants a 4-person party, especially for combat. It was just me, Shadowheart, and Astarion. Thankfully, I remembered that I still had that guy that was stuck in that rock. Unfortunately, he is more on the side of doing what's right. I just tried not to talk to him, honestly. I was standoffish enough that he just didn't really like me, but I didn't do anything super terrible directly to him because I knew he would leave my party. And at this point, he was literally my only option. I probably spent most of my time skipping whatever he had to say. But if I can tell you anything, he would not shut up about his goddess. It's also good to note that if you plan on playing this game, there's a massive chance that you're not going to get the same version of each character's story that I did. Each playthrough is a unique experience. Since my first run was chaotically evil, I deliberately chose all of the bad dialogues and choices. Basically, my point is, you have a lot of control. I was able to influence both of my religious pals and their religious choices that they made along the way, like leading Shadowheart even further into the darkness, or convincing the arguably most lawful good character to turn on his goddess and turn as evil as possible. They said I couldn't do it, but with enough manipulation, by the end, Gale had been indoctrinated into helping my terrible deeds. I destroyed this lore-rich world one bad decision at a time. Baldur's Gate is an extremely religious world full of so many different paths, with a wide range of different religions. I mean, just look at all these choices too for deities that I could worship if I played a cleric. In the case of research, my first playthrough was just not gonna work. We needed to start fresh, leave that old life behind us. We needed to live a life that is full of religious aspects to fully embrace this world. So we're gonna throw away that dark urge background and unhealthy obsession with this guy because it is now time to turn a new leaf. The hardest choice was convincing myself not to play as a drow with a tragic backstory again, so I simply settled for a wood elf with a sage background. Apparently, I'm curious and well read, with an unending thirst for knowledge. Learning about the rare lore of the world will inspire you to put this knowledge to a greater purpose. It was finally time for me to put my atheist inspired characters behind and just go full on religion and play as a cleric. I decided to play a chaotic good cleric of the nature domain. Her deity is Maliki, a neutral good goddess. Maliki is the goddess of forest and the creatures that live within them. She is a remote and spiritual deity, often spoken of in but of the quietest of forest. I picked this one because it reminded me of Taoism. After spending years in character creation, we were finally good to go. Fuck, now I have to come up with a name. You know what? I got it. What is something that every religion seems to kind of have in common? They are all seemingly collections of metaphors. Metaphor requires context, experiences, and points of views. Metaphor is a part of someone's experience of God, and our concepts of religion are built out of metaphors. Religious myths are just another way to say metaphor. But keep in mind, just because we call something a myth, this doesn't take away from it. We still learned a lesson, even if that exact event did not happen exactly how it was presented to us. So, religions are filled to the brim with myth and metaphors in this virtual world, just like real life religions. But there has to be more than that, right? Back to our adventure. I mean, research. Back to our research. You know what they say creation comes from previous destruction. I'm a new person now, ready to right all of my wrongs through the power of God. From the get go, religion is embedded deeply into this world of the Forgotten Realms. But what do they all seem to have in common? I realized I actually may have learned a lot more from my first run than I initially had thought. Even though I was playing someone who was pretty much an atheist or ready to kind of square up with all the gods, I still ended up getting my own little story. And though I did do some terrible things, I did the things that mattered. Like, I decided not to be completely evil. And I actually helped my boyfriend, my vampire boyfriend, not be evil. Because if he gets any more evil, he doesn't have the ability to love. So that's really sad. Even though I was playing a character that I didn't really think was very religious, I still feel like I could call the whole experience of what their adventure was. That was a pretty religious experience, if you ask me. There's a lot of mystical moments, a lot of things that were like, they're pretty crazy, especially when I played, especially because I played the Haunted One background. And that opens a whole new can of worms in terms of gameplay. It's crazy. That adventure had showed me so many mystical moments, like when we took Shadowheart into Char's domain. She said it was not really something that she could explain. When you can't describe something you use metaphors or you try to make it where people can understand it. Metaphors and myths help drive their beliefs, but everyone's own individual experience is what makes religion and what it means to them. There seems to be this driving force, something to make each of these characters feel like they have almost a purpose or a mission. Maybe it's the servitude of a god or the cleansing of a church, but they're given some kind of goal, something to work towards, something to live for. Here is what I've gathered so far. Everyone has their own individual uneasiness, and these religions help them find a solution, and it's seemingly different to each person. It's about finding yourself and creating your own path, not being in the image of what a god would want you to be, but your true self, authentically you. While I was in my first playthrough in the Underdark, I came across these fish people, and they were all devoted in worship and didn't even notice me. They just, like, I walked right past them. They didn't care. Nothing at all. It was all about God. I passed a check, and I found out that these fish people manifest their God through sheer beliefs. And that right there, even as crazy as it is, and even though the game does call the god that they're worshiping a false god, because it is basically a knockoff of another god, but there's still a mystical experience happening, and the fish people are literally manifesting their god through sheer belief. And when you think about it, most of these characters are. Shadowheart is driven by Shar, Gale's driven by Mistra. The Chosen Ones seem to have been given incredible powers and some kind of something they're supposed to do in the name of their god. But when you think about it, thinking of this whole game and thinking of all the choices you can make and how deep you can affect this world around you, the power is the ability to create your own path. And I don't think you need to be blessed by a god to find that. In The Varieties of Religious Experience by William James, there was a quote that I thought was interesting to include. They all agree that the more really exist, though some of them hold it to exist in the shape of a personal god or gods, while others are satisfied to conceive it as a stream of ideal tendency embedded in the eternal structure of the world. Dungeons and Dragons and Baldur's Gate is all about choosing your own path. Just because I was evil in my playthrough, I wasn't directly evil to Astarion because, duh, he was my vampire boyfriend. So instead, I did one good thing in that whole playthrough, and I helped him find himself. And even though we still weren't considered religious, he still found his path and his purpose. And I would say that's a pretty religious experience. Even though we're not directly claiming it to be under a god or in someone's name, that's still an experience that he had, and it was him that made that choice. He had the ability, along with my influence. he, I kept insisting that he was the one who made that choice because he was like, "Oh my god, like, thank you for helping me," and I was like, "No, boo, it was all you." Even though I didn't think to consider it religious, we still found a path, and he ended up finding his purpose and what he wanted in life and what made him happy. I would say that's pretty religious to me. It wasn't a god that motivated Astarion, but I think it was this ideal tendency that he has the power to live whatever life that he chooses. And in my opinion, I feel like God is that ability that is being actualized for things to even be done in the first place. God is the being that lets you be. Perhaps religion is simply different ways of looking at the parts for what they are, but also understanding how they fit into the whole. In Dungeons and Dragons, religion is anything you want it to be. Religion is being in touch with something greater than yourself. But that has always been there. Gods in D&D guide our way to finding meaning in our higher selves. There is more to you than you know, but in the end, it is still you.
I knew you had that sweet heart all along. I was alarmed by you sometimes, scandalized even. But somehow, by your side, I still only ever saw you.